Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 114. We are going to be talking about, we haven't decided yet.
Yeah, it was sort of like vaguely Halloween tropes, because we usually try to pull together some sort of like Halloween themed thing.
Often after Halloween.
So we were ahead of schedule, but behind on concepts.
Yeah, we discussed it and didn't discuss it thoroughly enough such that we came together to record and realized we had two different ideas about what we were going to do today.
Yes.
So please enjoy us groping our way through some sort of a top 10 list for this Halloween 2023.
Yes, this episode could be called the Top 10 List. So hot right now.
All right. Do you have anything to plug?
Nope.
I would like to plug Terror Vault.
Yeah.
Peaches Christ has done it again. She has put on at the San Francisco Mint another haunted attraction. This year, it is called The Initiation, and it is all around a cult. And it's more of a single story through line this time instead of a few disjointed narratives throughout. My niece was in town, and she wasn't able to go to the Terror Vault because she came before it opened. And Peaches gave us, Monique, Madison, and I a tour of the in-progress Terror Vault, and it was actually as scary and weird and eerie to be walking through it when it is completely empty, and then maybe there's one person per floor, like painting something in the dark. It was pretty awesome. I'm really excited to see what they do with it when it's full of players.
Man, I bet it's just fun to build that shit all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
It's so good. We also got to see like their storage, which is just like rows and rows of weird masks and costumes and buckets of paint. And
So good.
Yeah, it was really, really good.
I bet it's like the horror version of like when you see like the Weta Workshop storage facilities.
Yeah, it's like that. Okay, let's just get into it. So we had originally discussed doing a Halloween episode. We wanted to do some sort of top 10. I think we both took that assignment different ways.
Yeah, one of the, I think, early ideas was we were just going to do top 10 films, which is just kind of a perennial thing. But I realized like we've done whole episodes in all of those 10 films. So to me, I was like, okay, well, other than Midsummer, which I finally watched, we've already talked about all this stuff. So what are we doing here?
We've discussed all of my favorite horror movies on this podcast, except maybe The Shining already. So we also haven't been watching a lot of contemporary horror movies, so that kind of shoots that option down. So, I mean, I sort of took it as, let's do the very Scary Thoughts thing of just take the idea of horror in the most liberal way possible and talk about like top 10 horrifying things about basically being alive in 2023. So I have 5 things that are sort of around that. And they do touch on horror movie tropes and things like that. But what are your 5 circulating around? Is there a through line?
Mine were basically like 5 evergreen Halloween movie tropes. Because I was kind of thinking of the difference between like Halloween movies and horror movies. Like there's there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram, but there are some subtle differences. Like Boo, Medea, Halloween, not a horror movie.
Right.
At all, but certainly a Halloween movie. Same with Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And then I would say like Midsummer, not a Halloween movie.
Right.
Just because it's so rude. I mean, it's so great. So it's kind of beyond like just a season, but it's also literally about a different season. So it'd be like being like Elf is my favorite Halloween movie, kind of.
Right. Yeah. So why don't you start? What's your number 5?
So it's not even, some of them I like, some of them I don't like. So this is what I don't like. There's something strange about this day or event. Like that seems to be it's
as a trope in horror movie.
Yeah. Like it is the anniversary of the thing, or this thing is going to happen on this day, or we've uncovered a thing that happens on this day. And to me, like this is such a pedantic point, but like whose calendar? You know what I mean? Like, so like if it's some ancient Sumerian god that's come to fuck with stuff, like why like American Halloween, October 31st or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
that to me is a silly thing.
Well, there's also the laziness of when writing these things of like, once every 25 years, this thing happens. Once every 250 years.
Right.
Why would a demon round up to the nearest 10 or
Totally.
50 or 100? Why does something that's existed for all time use a metric way of counting days and lunar cycles?
Totally. I mean, and then this is the thing with it as well, you know, the dairy cycle, which is like every 27 years or 24 or 27. I can't remember. I think it's 27. Why?
Yeah.
It's just, you know, and that, at least you don't ever really know anything about that creature.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that are like things I find kind of delightful, like Trick or Treat takes place on Halloween. That's a super fun little movie.
Yeah.
You know, Happy Death Day takes place on a specific day for that girl, and that movie is kind of fun.
I wonder if the thing that you're talking about at the outset is actually because of the movie Halloween. Like without Halloween, there's no Friday the 13th, and there's none of these movies. It's not that there wouldn't be Halloween movies, and it's not that there wouldn't be horror movies based on something annual. But it really, as far as I can think, other than obviously Black Christmas, which we can look at as having launched the slasher film as a genre, it really seems to have begun with Halloween, that there's this thing and it happens every year. And that's what the franchise is based on.
Yeah. When I read the book about the writing of Groundhog Day, like the author of it made a point, which I wonder, I have to assume is factored into these movies, but he basically said, if we make a good movie about Groundhog Day, it'll be the only one, and it'll play every single Groundhog Day, and we'll get tons of residuals every year forever.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. And he, like, it was specific. Like, one of the reasons why he even thought of Groundhog Day as part of it was because there hadn't been any movies associated with it. So he kind of like staked his claim on that date, which to me says, man, like a Kwanzaa slasher is just like ready to be made.
Although I think there will always be a Groundhog Day. I don't know that Kwanzaa is going to be a thing in 10 years.
Well, I mean, the FBI have put a lot of effort into that.
Oh my God. Are we done with this one now?
Yeah, I'm done with that one.
Yeah. So I guess number 9 should be my first thing. I think that elevated horror might be over. I think that, you know, when that term started getting thrown around, it was describing an ascent of big funding for horror cinema, what, you know, we would consider horror movies. But suddenly they were really high budget in a way that we hadn't really seen much of. You know, there are definitely anomalies like The Shining, where these big epic horror movies, but really horror cinema doesn't garner big budgets like we were seeing with something like Hereditary. And even in smaller budgets with things like It Follows, it's essentially a horror movie, but it's not following the template of most horror movies, right? There's not a template for horror movies. There are several, but they're pretty predictable. They have pretty consistent pacing, aesthetics, all of that. And there was this moment that was called elevated horror where a lot of those were being overturned and more priority was being given to cinematography, the music, a lot of more unique choices. You and I definitely bristled at the term elevated horror because it was fucking pretentious and stupid.
I was going to say that we had a lot of discussion about this, like what it was going to be. And we had like auteur horror is kind of what we were calling it.
Yeah.
Which was also pretentious.
Totally. But regardless of whether or not the term seemed pretentious or even the non-movement, it actually seems to be over, and I'm disappointed because some of my favorite movies ever were those movies.
I totally agree.
And now, like 2023, was there an elevated horror movie in 2023? Not really. There are some good horror movies, definitely some good, big, interesting horror movies, but that were on par with something like Hereditary, no.
Yeah, I think part of it has to do with like what A24 was even trying to do. You know, their recognition that genre films were a place for young filmmakers to really, really show off. So what if they gave them a little bit more support to even show off even more, you know, and do like really singular work? And yeah, all those movies are great. Like, you know, like when you get to the end of something, often you start shitting on it and hating it because it gets stupid or whatever. Like those films are still good. It Follows is still super fun. Hereditary is great. Neon Demon even.
Yeah.
You know, like I guess you could say like the things from it that were copied and spread, like the bisexual lighting, you know, the purple and blue lights and stuff. But that's almost like, you can't fault that genre. That's like faulting Tarantino for every single commercial where there's like smash cuts of going dun dun dun, like that Kill Bill sound. It's like, you can't really blame A24 for all this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. It seems like a little bit what might be coming into fashion right now, maybe even tangentially because of the success of James Gunn coming from Troma Films to like helming DC, is that sort of like zany, high concept weirdo horror film. Like Psycho Gorman would be an example. The Terrifier films, Terrifier 2, they're a little different. They're more like extreme slashers or whatever. But there definitely is a lot of like this kind of stuff, like the Overlook Guys cover, like is being really well done right now, I think.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that kind of runs alongside my disappointment is that something that was also ascendant at the same time as elevated horror is the, I don't know, meta horror, the too clever by half horror that has always existed.
Yeah.
Like horror movies have been self-reflexive since they were in black and white. But there's definitely, alongside things like Stranger Things, been the thing that riffs on Scream declaring the rules. It seems that elevated horror might be done, but that kind of approach to horror seems to be just as present. Like the biggest horror movies of the last year are often still people talking about the tropes of horror movies while they're running from a killer. And it's like the tropes of horror movies are boring. So now we acknowledge that the tropes are boring, and now that's a trope that is boring. So it is recycling the recycling. Yeah. And if I can use that metaphor to its natural conclusion, recycled recyclement is a weaker product by definition.
This is Baudrillard territory here. But I agree. You know, I don't like any of the Scream sequels at all. Like, because I think what's great about Scream is just the concept of it, you know, and the way they do it. It's so clever, so fun. It was so perfect for its time, because you're kind of coming out of what, you know, like now they're sort of marketing the early 90s as the lost horror decade, because there was like not as many franchises going on, or if they were terrible and there weren't big budget stuff. And then that movie just came in and like dusted the whole thing off. Yeah. You know,
it was sort of a Nirvana Nevermind moment where suddenly everybody looked embarrassed.
Yeah. And you either like couldn't do that anymore, those things, or you had to be clever about it. I mean, especially think about like how aware any film is of killing the black character first. You know, like that. It's almost now like if it does happen or doesn't happen, it's so highlighted. Yep. Like it's never like not highlighted.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, maybe it is some places, but you know what I'm saying? Like
completely.
There's like the different rules and stuff, or like, you know, the need to have the thing in the beginning of the film pay off at the end of the film. You know, there's like mirrored sequences. Yeah. That's totally horror stuff.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What's number 8?
All right. Number 8 for me is It's the Company, man. Like, so this was like
who is wearing a Nostromo baseball hat.
Yeah, this
just point that out.
So this is probably my favorite. Like, it can either be a plot or a subplot, right? You know, like in Alien, for example, the android is explicitly trying to get the alien onto the ship, so corporate greed causes the whole thing. But at the same time, there's this crazy monster on the ship too. And I think Alien and the whole Alien franchise is probably the best example of this, because Weyland-Yutani is such a specific character. And then I love this stuff because it just seems more realistic to me that like a giant organization would cause so much damage, destruction, and evil than that there was like a natural force of evil, like the devil. So it's basically like having the devil, but, in a business class setting, I guess.
Well, given that we're going to have capitalism until the end of time, it's just as perennial a fear to have as to have a fear of the devil, which actually seems to be waning in Western civilization, right?
Yeah, maybe that's the plan. That's the C.S. Lewis thing. It's like the devil's first real good trick is to trick you that he's not real or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, I think Cabin in the Woods does this trope really well too, but it's a little bit different. Like there is the evil,
it's kind of
an actual evil, but it's like managed by this bureaucracy. And
so good.
Yeah. And it's actually one of the things I really like. Instead of watching, a horror movie every night, like you're supposed to in Halloween, if you're a good horror podcaster, I have immersed myself in the Jack Ryan series on Amazon Prime.
Very pleasurable.
Yeah, very pleasurable. And I realized that like these films like Alien and all that stuff, they do have sort of like I guess it's like now you would call it like a GWAT vibe, the global war on terror. That sort of like dark company in the background. Like the CIA is very much the company in that show. And then in real life, the CIA are absolute fuckers. Like there's that book, Surprise, Vanish, Kill, that's just all about like the crazy shit the CIA has done for the last, since they've been around. And the book could be called Wherever We're At 20 Years Later, There's going to be a Horrible War.
Yeah.
And so I think, though, like the reason why this works so much is it plays on this real fear that these big organizations do not have your best interest at heart.
Yeah. Although I find that something like a Jack Ryan or what's the Matt Damon one?
Bourne Identity. The Bourne
series. They definitely are critical of these government espionage institutions, but I don't know that you walk away from them as knowing what to mistrust. Like, honestly, for example, the Bourne movies, I've seen them all probably 2 or 3 times. I don't know what branch of government was the evil one and how deep the evil went, or if it was just one bad egg in a fictionalized branch of government that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think it might have been. I can't even remember. I actually even rewatched the first Bourne movie.
So case in point,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's like completely. It's so tropey that it just absorbs, and they may as well made up an organization. They probably did make up.
They might have.
They might have actually made up an organization.
But so to that point, the net result might be the thing I know I bring up all the time, which is you can't make an anti-war movie because by depicting war, you're making it look exciting. You just can't get around that aspect of cinema. These international espionage thrillers, it sort of almost doesn't matter what branch of government and if the actual branch is the villain or if the branch is on the side of good. It's sort of just one movie. They're all just sort of one thing. There's one person fighting for good against all odds, and whether their government or their boss or is on their side or against their side is almost immaterial. It's just a fun ride to watch one, usually man, fly around the world, James Bond style, and work out world peace with fisticuffs.
Yeah, I feel like I could just spend the rest of this episode talking about Jack Ryan in that show, because it's making me think a lot of, this trope certainly makes it up. But one of the things I think that the Jack Ryan character and like Ripley have in common is that they have some sort of like inner compass morality, which is like guiding them, but it's also sort of aligned with like the true mission statement of the thing. Like, Ripley is basically following protocol the whole time. Like one of the reasons why the reason why she's heroic is she's not really like trained to fight a monster in space, and she wins anyway, which is badass. But, like her seat of power sort of is she's doing the right thing. She's sort of like a Lisa Simpson in a way. And like Jack Ryan has that there too. But it's funny how I think the reason why the Ripley character is so enduring is her morality continues to make sense. Whereas like Jack Ryan will just be like, now I'm going to cut this guy's finger off. It's like, well, what are we doing here? And it has a very like ends justifies the means sort of vibe, which all those films do, like whether it be Zero Dark 30 or whatever. It's like, obviously you want
or the entire series 24.
Yeah. Like
obviously he had to do it. It's a TV show and they wrote the plot that way. Yeah.
Like, well, what if the tough choice was to like, build a power plant in that country. Yes, it is $100 billion, but perhaps it will make it not a terrorist hive if we were to fix it. You know? Like making the tough choices, like building infrastructure.
Yeah. Something I wanted to say at the beginning of this episode that I guess now is as good a time as any, when I was like, what are the most horrifying things of 2023? I'm not talking about war. Like we're not talking about actual political horrors in this episode. That's not what I'm interested in addressing.
That is Anderson Cooper's beat. It is not our beat.
And I feel like we might off the cuff do a better job than he.
Yes. Well, he is a Vanderbilt, so he has his loyalties.
Yeah. All right. So number 7 is rubbernecking, which the word comes from, turning your head to look at something awful. Mm-hmm. Easiest way to think about that. Sorry, I'm explaining something that I assume everybody knows what it is, but just to be plain and obvious, you're driving down the freeway, traffic jams up, not because there's an accident in front of you, but an accident on the other side, and everybody stops to take a look. Mm-hmm. And that actually can cause traffic accidents. But something that has really started to annoy the shit out of me is noticing how much online rubbernecking exists as its own phenomenon. Whether it's a New York Times article, whether it's a Substack article, whether it's a podcast on any part of the political spectrum, people are always looking for dumbass dissenting opinions and including it in the analysis. So because all journalists are on Twitter, all journalists take Twitter as being an important source of information. Mm-hmm. And consequently, something happens, journalists are on Twitter, they see people saying outrageous shit, and then they bring that outrageous shit to you, and it validates it, and it keeps it an active part of the conversation. So we have this thing where there's this belief that counter arguments must be upheld, that to create political balance, you need to let everybody have a say. Mm-hmm. And that's of course not true. Some people's opinions are just fucking ridiculous and don't count. We don't need to hear from people who believe we're all controlled by lizard people in a political discussion at Princeton, right?
Yeah, but journalists have also made having those positions a news story.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oh, that is exactly what I think is horrifying in this moment, is that we have this belief that the internet has democratized information. I mean, this is fucking Joe Rogan's entire life, where he's just like, it's great. Free speech makes everything finally come out and truth will out. I was like, no, the biggest asshole is often the one who shouts the loudest. And also we all have access to it. And then CNN is just as happy to uphold whether for or against that opinion as anyone else. And so we're constantly being confronted by the stupidest, shittiest opinions that humanity has to offer. And they are all being given time and weight because we rubberneck. We want to know. It's you won't believe what happens next. Mm-hmm. Every time I dip my toe into the news or into a Substack or something, I find someone going like, you won't believe how fucking awful this thing is. Look at all these opinions that are happening. I'm like, I don't know any of those people. I don't care what their opinions are, but they are an outsized part of any conversation now. And it is, I think, an unsolvable problem at the moment because we all have access to everything. We're always going to want to see the most outrageous version of the thing. And then our blood pressure goes up because we can't believe someone actually believes that. My life is better when I don't know that people believe that.
Yeah. I think there's going to be like a pretty profound bifurcation of society based on people who pay a lot of attention to that stuff and then people who go out and actually do things. This is Cal Newport stuff. You could, if you had spent 8 hours a day on Reddit looking at the news, freaking out about whatever, you're probably worse off than if you spent 8 hours a day. Like even learning how to draw would be better, because at least think about it. Like if you divide the time you spend looking at the news over the year at the end of the year, you have fucking nothing to show about for it at all. But if you had spent that same amount of time learning Settlers of Catan strategy, you'd at least be good at Catan by the end of the year. Like, there's just like an infinite number of things that I think are better worth your time than the opinions of morons. And like, and how do you know if somebody's a moron? Well, like, they're just not famous. They just say.
Well, no, that's totally fair. I mean, the amount of time I find myself discussing the opinions of morons is upsetting to me.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to curb. And I am someone who is saying this right now. You know, I am like, yeah, this is a problem. It seems to be a problem fucking everywhere. It's even a problem with me. And I'm someone who tries desperately to avoid the opinions of idiots. You know?
I mean, I feel like there are people who think about they need to police the opinions of idiots. Whatever side you're on, there's going to be morons everywhere. You know, I think honestly, it's like the more I dig into like just capabilities based on IQ, and like that a quarter of America has like an IQ under 80 or something like that. I feel like that might be the problem. People who are just not made for the modern world. Like my mom can't work any sort of email device at all. You know, there's people like that. So what do you do with people like that? Do you like create like a weird like moron reservation? I mean, that's kind of the internet, right?
It is. I mean, part of the problem with bending this issue in that direction is that being of lesser intelligence does not have a moral correlate. Mm-hmm. Being smart doesn't make you a more moral person. And this is, I think, the biggest problem with the managerial class, with the journalists who all have master's degrees, with the people who make most of the decisions in this world, is they think they're better than everybody else, act like they're better than everybody else, and control the game. Yeah. And their moral superiority is transparently unfounded.
Yeah. Well, I think just morality in general is just transparently unfounded. You know, it's like, whose morality? You know what I mean? It depends on what line you're on. If the person on the other side of the line's behavior is not to your liking or whatever. I feel like my perspective on this is just totally, literally rubbernecking, which is like, I just watched so much Jerry Springer in the 90s that like, I just have this awareness that like you're looking at crazy people, you know, and that the best thing you can do is just to kind of like not interact with them, or like put them in a zoo and think, fuck, at least I'm not like that.
Well, I mean, that is the thing about the managerial class, right? Is that you have an education, you have a stable job. At least I'm not like those other people. Like, yeah, you are to them.
Well, I mean, that's a point I was going to make too, is like, if you like, suddenly,
we're all in a zoo.
Yeah. If you had suddenly like, if the society were to like completely follow all of my ideas about it to a T, it would probably be terrible.
It would be fun for a few days.
Yeah. It would be fun for a little while, but then, you know, I mean, some things would be better. Some things would be worse, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, we wouldn't have the tyranny of fluoride anymore. That's for sure.
What do you got for number 6?
Okay, let's see. What do we got here? This is one that is just like, I don't know if it's because I went to Catholic school or what, but the devil is here. If only there was some sort of global organization that knew how to deal with him. You see it in The Exorcist, right? Like, to me, there's always this like problem with like devil stories where it's like, okay, you have like irrefutable evidence of the devil. It's not like, oh, did you hear that? Like the stupid ghost shows. It's like the girl's body changes, her, you know, in The Exorcist, she just looks like a fucking demon. Yeah. There's no way you would not, in that world, you would not think, holy fuck, something is up. And if you follow the theology of the thing, it's sort of like that episode of Rick and Morty where they just start praising Jesus and they beat Storylord. That's how all of those stories should go, is you just go, thank you, Jesus. And then it's fucking done, you know?
Right.
But it is not like that ever.
I mean, we've sort of touched on this before, but I think it was my complaining about like, if I'm watching a horror movie, I don't want to simultaneously be indoctrinated into Roman Catholicism. Mm-hmm. All movies in the world building, it's declaring a truth. And I'm not saying a movie is necessarily advocating a political position around a truth. It's just that doesn't matter what movie it is, there's a truth in that world building. And so many horror movies, the truth of that world is that baby Jesus died for your sins and will protect you from evil. There is good and there is evil, and the side of good is that Jesus rose from the dead. And you know what I mean? And I'm not on board with that. That's not a world building that I am comfortable jumping on board anytime there's a demon in a movie.
Yeah.
But then again, that's where we get ideas of demons and spirits, is in this basically Christian-derived mythology.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're stuck in whatever mythology you grew up with, kind of. Like, you're never going to get away from that. I mean, I guess you could do something really wild with it, though, like the Preacher comics. Like, you know, in that, like, God's just basically an asshole, and then a cowboy shoots him to death at some point, you know? That's kind of...
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. The Preacher, that's a silly comic series that I really loved in the 90s. I was so disappointed in the show. The show, to me, was god-awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the exception of the guy that plays Cassidy the Vampire, who I think totally nailed it.
Do you know what actor that was?
I don't know.
Okay, whatever.
Some Irish guy.
All right.
Maybe.
So I guess we're at number 5. Before I continue, because I realize mine are really ranty. Thank you all for listening.
Well, that was ranty on mine.
But yours was about movies.
Yeah.
Mine is about politics. I feel like there's a different coloration to each of them. Mine is more annoying. And I would like to basically kind of put out there that this is sort of like a part of my top 5, but it's like a meta on the top 5, which is that I'm pretty firmly on the left. And like a lot of people on the left, increasingly, I've been more and more irritated by people on the left. And part of my next one is kind of about that. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the failures of my own belief system and the people who follow my own belief system. And
I do too.
The reason I know you do. I know you do. But part of why that is the case is that people who believe that Trump is a good Christian, there's not much for me to think about.
It's so crazy.
It's just completely batshit off the wall crazy that I don't think about it. I also am never around those people, so I'm not concerned with those people. I mean, I am politically concerned with those people because they're standing between me and a world I want to live in. But the craziness that's been going on the left, especially since Trump took office in the first place, is that I see those people every day and I talk to them every day, and a lot of their belief system is like absolutely parallel with mine, and a lot of the foundational ethics and morals are totally in line with my own. So when I see it go off the rails, I'm invested in it not going off the rails. I feel like I'm participating in some way with that bullshit. So that's why I'm often talking shit about the left on this podcast when I am resolutely on the left.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it too, there was like, I think in general, there's like periods of time where like certain people are kind of more in the driver's seat of culture or politics or whatever. And, you know, nobody gets it right for everybody, you know, like, so it's like, I just distinctly remember like just being so anti Pat Robertson, Christian right, Reagan era shit, you know, like just like so again, like I felt like that about like probably how people feel about like Trump people now, you know, that to me was just so just fucking annoying. You would look around and be like, how are you guys not see that this fucking faith healer dude, like fucking Nancy Reagan had an astrologer. There was a White House astrologer. What the fuck, you know? And now that would probably be celebrated by people. But like, to me, it was just so goddamn absurd that like any sort of policy could be made under the influence of astrology in any way. And now I feel similarly now, you know, you look at Biden and like, there's a million things you could say about him. The thing I find annoying and maybe parallels your thing is like, at any point you can just hate on somebody. You don't have to be on a team and declare certain people off limits. You know what I mean? Like you could just hate, just spread it around, just hate on everything. Like it's not like, you don't have to like put yourself in a hateless box, you know? Just be angry all the time at everyone and everyone's beliefs.
I'm like 50% on board with what you just said.
This is just Camus stuff, you know? We're all pushing the stone up the hill.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like who's in our fucking way in any given time, you know?
Yes.
That's just a matter of perception.
Totally. Okay, so number 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of thinking as being like a liberal death cult.
Mm.
It's kind of a cliche to say that all cultures have an apocalypse story.
Mm-hmm.
They have a Genesis story and they have an apocalypse story. Most godless liberal Westerners don't necessarily have a creation myth other than the Big Bang, which is pretty flaccid.
Boring. It's pretty boring.
It's pretty boring and abstract.
Yeah.
But
it's the Jackson Pollock of creation myths.
But I am really increasingly finding that when I bump into somebody, whether at work or on the street, someone I know, and I'll go, "Hey, how are you?" Their response is, "Well, you know." Actually, no, I don't. I'm having a great day. What's your fucking problem? And they inevitably bring up, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It was COVID for a while. It's definitely climate change perennially. Lately, it's been about Israel, Hamas, Palestine. No, I don't know. So it's less of an irritation for me when it's about something that just happened in the news that someone's distracted by.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, that can affect your mood. I totally get that. But there are certain people I can completely depend on to respond to, "Hey, how are you?" with dread about the imminent apocalypse.
You can't be around those people. You just got to get away from
It
them.
is so frustrating, and it is stemming from an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
They're allowing their religious beliefs that the world is going to end immediately, and we're all to blame and we deserve it. And that is infecting their ability to have a nice day, to overcome depression, to interact with other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's alienating. It actively keeps them alienated. And it's kind of, it's part of a cycle of depression, right?
It's just bad for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just all that stress.
But it's, when you're depressed, you act depressed, and generally people want to stay away from you, which makes you more alienated, which feeds your depression, and it's a cycle. There is this like end run aspect to it where if you insert a certain kind of political position into it, you can feel a little righteous about that factor. You can't feel self-righteous about sitting at home and eating ice cream and thinking you're doing the world a favor.
Oh, I 100% do exactly that and think that.
Okay.
We'll get back on my diet,
Lord.
my ice cream diet in a minute. But
okay, well, fuck. I don't have the
That's
energy to come up with another example
let's
of
put
what
a pin.
I'm saying.
Okay, so this is we'll put a pin on it for a second and we'll come back to it in a moment. But like my idea that like you should be surprised by somebody's outlooks if they're fun to be around. And I find that like part of what you're talking about is like these people, these tedious fucking people, I know what they're going to say about anything.
Yeah.
I could just triangulate, like, oh, you got a mask on right now and you're in your car by yourself. I definitely know how you feel about Jared Kushner or whatever,
Yes. Well, I guess I'm I think I'm coming at it slightly differently where I'm a little more angrier at the ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is a bummer to be around that person, but I'm also not necessarily angry at that person. I'm sort of angry at the conditions that has made that a tenable approach to human interaction.
Yeah.
That there is a self-righteousness that can come with your doomsaying.
Mm-hmm.
Your apocalypse narrative is somehow a righteous path that you're walking. And that if you infect other people with your doom and gloom story, you're somehow doing the world a service. And obviously, people doing that with climate change isn't the same kind of death cult that, let's say, Hamas is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the comparison is worth sort of like walking out a certain short distance.
Have you been exposed to actual climate data recently that doesn't fit the narrative? Is that why
I don't read climate data. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing about climate data is like, it's essentially unreadable. Like that's like one of the critiques of it is that like, no one really knows what's going on because it's such a big system and there's no way to test it. Like you can't like turn off all the human CO2 production and see what happens. Like you don't know. So that's like one of the things. And then the other thing that you'll run into if you start going down to the what's going on with climate anyway sort of thing is like these big fixes don't work at all. Like that's like, like the windmill farms are like totally like that stuff.
Like we're going to be carbon neutral by this date.
Yeah.
Based on what science?
Or I've worked on several projects at companies like over the years where like somebody in the company like reads about like planting trees for carbon sequestration, and you're like, I guess that works, but eventually the tree gets cut down and the carbon's re-released or whatever. But the amount of fraud in these systems is super, super crazy. So it's like, my opinion on it is like, it's totally possible that all these like terrible, destructive, environmentally shitty things that we do is certainly affecting the climate. It's just, where is it affecting it? Like, it seems to be that it's not going to end life on Earth, which is what some people believe, but it will fuck up your ability to live in a coastal city, which is a huge bummer. So, like Christopher Hitchens used to say, like, what's the downside of like kind of trying to correct for this is like things are a little bit cleaner. And that's like a positive outcome for anybody. But I think the whole, like I know people whose kids really thought that like Greta Thunberg and AOC were right, that like everybody would be dead by 2030.
Yeah.
And so it caused this like massive paralysis in kids. Like I know somebody's kid who's just like depressed all the time over climate stuff. And I was like, man, that's fucked up. Like even if you're so like downtrodden because you think it's so hopeless, you're not going to be the kid that like invents the like that Boylan kid that invented the ocean river cleanup machines. That shit's cool. He just put giant nets at the end of like some rivers in India and is collecting a ton of trash. And it's like, you got to scale it up, but like, yeah, there's going to be a positive thing to be done. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just going on a nowhere rant about nothing. It's semi-optimistic too. It's just very weird.
What number are we at? 4?
4. Yeah.
Bring it.
The Dead Walk Again. This is something I like. Like I pretty much like
This is not a good year for Dead Walking Again.
What do you mean?
In cinema, I think this is the year that proves that the zombie era is like so done.
Well, one of the things that's so interesting about it is like there's all these zombie shows. Like if you go into Netflix or Amazon or whatever, there's like a shitload of them. They're like sub Walking Dead shows,
and they're not good.
And they're not good, but what they're bad, but they're also burning through ideas. So you'll see like sort of an interesting idea in one of these shows and you're like, well, that's done now. And it was done by them in this terrible show. So it's done. I mean, it's like.
Yeah, but each of those things was one page in World War Z.
Exactly. Like I feel like, yeah, World War Z and probably up to season 3 of The Walking Dead were probably like peak zombie.
Yeah, actually, I was just having a conversation with somebody, hey Calder, about this yesterday, that Walking Dead up to, so when they were in the prison,
yeah,
and were stabbing through the chain link fence, and that's how they were mass slaughtering zombies. Like, they figured out the best, most efficient way to kill zombies. Mm-hmm. And not only, did they figure out a way, they were starting to engage with zombies in a way of like, how can we get on top of this? How can this not control us completely and have us running scared all the time?
Yeah.
As soon as they left that prison, they were back to, what do I do when a zombie slowly walks towards you that's still 100 yards away? It made no sense. Like there's no learning, there's no building in The Walking Dead. And Daryl Dixon, the first episode, I'm now forgetting, but I remember several instances of like, wait, all of these characters know how to not fall into this trap, and they do anyway, despite the fact that they've been living in a zombie apocalypse for a decade or however, whatever the timeline is. Are you talking about the
new Daryl Dixon show?
Yeah.
There's no fucking way I'm watching that.
It's not good.
Yeah.
I was pretty invested in it being good.
Well, I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting. I haven't watched it at all, but I read some sort of little interview with the dude that plays Daryl Dixon, whatever his name is, Mr. Dixon. And he was just talking about like how different the shooting style of the French crews is to the American crews. I guess in America, they're in Atlanta, money's burning, move through it really fast. And I guess they have a more like cinematic view on it. So I was hoping it would be cool, but it's not enough to make me watch it.
Well, just because you know that everybody got a proper lunch break because they're shooting in France doesn't make it a better show.
They only worked on it 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. But also the Dead Rising could be vampires. I feel like we're at the cusp, thanks mostly due to What We Do in the Shadows, a bit of a vampire revival. But it's so comedic in nature. It's like, I mean, you have that, you have Renfield, which was fucking terrible, but also kind of a comedy.
I enjoyed it.
Oh my God. That movie's fucking terrible.
I didn't say it was good. I just said I enjoyed it.
I mean, I'm not trying to be critical or anything, but that movie does have a couple really interesting things. Like the shot where Nicolas Cage is like reproducing the classic Bela Lugosi Dracula, like fade in from the shadows, is so well done. And I was like, man, like whoever worked on this specific thing did such a great job at it. It kind of like made me want to root for the movie a little bit, but it's just like a terrible CGI action movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Fuck.
Wait, is that what is? I feel like you brought something up and I immediately interrupted you and talked about something else. Was that what you wanted to talk about?
I was, this is any of the dead walking. This could be Pet Sematary.
Okay.
It could, if you've died and you get back up and then shenanigans.
That is a trope you like.
That is a trope that I like. For some reason, the idea of the dead coming back is interesting to me, whether it be the Sixth Sense or whatever.
All right.
And I really love like ghost outfit rules. Like, so like whether it be zombies or whatever, you get up and whatever you happen to have on is kind of how you are in undeath forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 8. You keep, it's funny. You're like, I like this and here's a thing I don't like.
Yeah. Well,
I'm concerned about snitching versus whistleblowing. I'm actually going to talk about horror movies. The thing that really got me thinking about this was I saw Totally Killer and Talk to Me in the span of 2 days. And it doesn't matter if you've seen them. There are no spoilers here. Totally Killer is, it stars the girl who played the lead daughter in Mad Men. I forget the actress's name. It is basically about a small town. There was a serial killer who killed a bunch of girls in the 80s. And then all these years later, he struck again. She goes back in time to stop the murders. One of the functions of a Gen Z girl from 2023 going back to, I think it's 1987, is that she is intolerably woke, and 50% of her dialogue is condescendingly correcting the behavior of teenagers in 1987. There's maybe a moment or two where it's played for a laugh or it's self-aware, but mostly it's sort of just natural. Like, yeah, she's a fucking nag. Kids today... Oh God, I just said kids today.
Yep.
Ouch. Here, well, you know what?
Okay, Abe Simpson.
I'm gonna commit
Let's
to
hear
this
hot take.
Yep. But it was just this really interesting, very transparent illustration of this thing of like nagging being justified, that correcting behavior is the right thing to do. It's one thing to complain about kids these days, but it's funny watching this movie where like it's a natural part of the dialogue.
Yeah.
Like she just goes back in time and she's like, that's problematic, and nobody knows what she's talking about. And it's a little funny, but it's also a little bit, well, no, that's actually kind of realistic that this person would go and do that and the effect would be net zero. And she's not a better person than these other kids. They obviously did some fucked up shit and tolerated some things that we should all be glad are in the rearview mirror in our culture. But being a fucking nag is really gross. And then Talk to Me is interesting. It's great. It is a totally solid movie. I think it might be the best horror movie I've seen in the last year. It's about a bunch of kids and they get up to some really, really high order fucked up shit. Nobody tells a parent. They keep it to themselves and they try to work through it. And I'm not saying that's the noble way to go, but it was interesting to see a bunch of 2023 kids just deal with shit on their own like it was 1987,
Yeah. It's funny, like, think about like the method towards heroism, and that Totally Killer is like, she establishes like her, I guess, her heroic credentials by like nagging people to death. Whereas in the 80s, you would like pile drive the Iron Sheik into a coma and prove how great America was doing that, and I feel like, I don't know what it is, but I prefer that to, like, to me, I mean, it's probably just a consequence of when I was raised, but the Hulk Hogan advice of like, say your prayers, take your vitamins, do some push-ups or whatever, seems to me so much more positive for society, even though it's all built on the steroid lie. So positive compared to like, you're just going to find fault with fucking everything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But this is also, of course, connected to that activism used to be something approximating putting your body on the line for something. Mm-hmm. And because we're in this era that we're sort of thinking in terms of like what identity politics has done, that people with liberal arts educations who come from a certain degree of privilege and have luxury beliefs are able to keep their distance from genuine consequences of how evil the world can be, have become incredibly invested in things that they do control, which is cultural production, language. And the investment becomes, well, I am going to police culture. I'm going to police language. That's my domain. My domain isn't foreign policy. My domain isn't what to actually do with all these people on the street. My domain is Virginia Woolf. My domain is half-assed science. And I'm going to wield those in a way that gives me agency in the world.
Yeah.
And the way that manifests is people nagging each other. That's a way to sort of like create effect in your culture.
Yeah. Well, the effectiveness
without actually doing shit.
Yeah. I mean,
substantive.
The effectiveness of nagging people is like effectively like a consequence of like outsourcing violence. You know?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, so it's like for example, you never see anybody like telling kids on BART not to litter. Yeah. I've never seen that before, right. Ever, you know, but I've seen like people, I don't know. It's just weird. Like you see actual bad behavior. I see it enough because where I lived for a lot, living in West Oakland, you just see people, you know, not exactly doing socially conscious shit all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like these dudes that just drive up to this homeless camp that was behind the loft I lived at. They roll down their windows and people skitter out to it. They sell them totally dangerous chemicals. They go back into like lives of like terrible slavery and to their addictions. And there's not that much like mainstream public hatred of that sort of thing. Like you should just be like for example, I've seen somebody get like dressed down for using the term guys in a corporate environment with way more hostility than I see people talk about like fentanyl dealers in San Francisco. I mean, not that some people are clearly bothered by it and speak up or whatever, but I'm just surprised that like you can't get around like there's just not different sort of ways into disliking that stuff. Like for example, if you're on the left, you probably are not so stoked on like ostentatious displays of wealth or whatever. Like you would be pretty bummed out over Bezos's yachts, but I don't hear shit about up-armored F-150s that the cartels use from Americans. You know what I mean? It's like, what about that ostentatious display of wealth? Like, and these people are actually, like, at least with Bezos, I order a sprinkler and it comes to my house in 2 days, you know? And the cartel's like murdering people and dissolving them in vats of acid, but there's not like popular outrage. Or you'll hear something like, well, that's what those people have to do to put food on their family's table. Like, are you crazy? Like, there's a lot of people who don't have murderous regimes to put food on the table.
Right. But again, there's not a thrill of speaking ill of the cartel. Mm-hmm. There is a thrill of speaking ill of a rich white man.
The other thing, too, is like, there's been no time period in human history where there haven't been just wild-ass people that are opposed to your goals.
Yes.
No matter, that's just the fact of it. And unless you can like engineer some sort of like outrageous global homogenized society, which sounds fucking terrible because it's not like a global, you know, society of absolute wealth and abundance that we're going to get, you know, we're going to be eating the bugs and owning nothing.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, connected to the problem with having an ideological bent to your identity is that when there's a win, do you take it as a win, or do you refuse to ever acknowledge that ground has been gained because you're invested in the struggle as being your identity? Mm-hmm. And part of that trouble is that no matter who you are on planet Earth, there are numerous people who wish you dead. Mm-hmm. Everybody experiences that.
You probably walk past people every day. Yeah. They're like, fuck this dude. Like,
it exercises power on your life at different levels, right? So I functionally experience that a lot less than a lot of other people on planet Earth, right? Like my life isn't actually very materially affected by how many people on this planet want me dead. Hamas would love for me to be dead, right? It's part of their stated goal that I should be murdered. But that doesn't affect my life. Some people, it affects their life. Mm-hmm. But if your identity is wrapped up in an ideology, you will always find someone who proves that you are still on the back foot. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the rubbernecking thing again. Like, you will always find someone on Twitter who hates you, and it enables you to continue the identity politics process, which was wielded by both the left and the right. You know, Trump is the champion identity politics warrior, that you can always feel like you are the underdog, because you can so easily find someone who's actively working against you, whether it actually affects your life or not.
Yeah.
CEOs of companies think they're the underdogs. People who are like top of their class at Princeton think they're underdogs. Everybody thinks they're an underdog because you can always figure out a way to feel that way.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There's like always somebody who has like more power than you, you know, and they're probably, and they probably got that way by like not letting you have all yours. You know, that seems to be how it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just makes me think of like that whole like Rick and Morty Buddhism, where it's like, just don't think about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Completely.
like, oh, like attachment to any of these things seems to be the root cause of suffering. So, but what are you supposed to do? Be completely detached from everything and let just like life dissolve into blah, like, who knows?
Well, I think that, I mean, you bring up Buddhism. I mean, part of that way of approaching life is that it's a process. I mean, just putting aside the idea of there's an enlightenment and you can hit it at some point. Mm-hmm. Do you completely detach from the world? No, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But you can make choices that keep you away from the things that make your life shittier. And one of the things that obviously makes your life shittier is being around information that makes you feel bad, mm-hmm. and that you can have no effect on. So do that. It helps.
Yeah, that Ralph DeBelly "Don't Look at the News" book could not be
great.
That's probably the greatest book ever written as far as advice goes, you know, because I find like I don't really have like the practice of like not looking at the news anymore. Like I still kind of look at some headlines or whatever every once in a while, but overall, like I've just been too busy reading about other stuff, like for work. Just developing a skill set seems to be the salve for this sort of thing. It's like there's no point where like getting really good at whatever. It doesn't even matter what it is. Almost like you can get good at almost anything, and it's going to be a better outcome than looking at the news.
Yes.
Like I watched like the stone skipping champions, like people who skip rocks in water. And I was like, man, this guy holds world records 432 feet or something like that. He throws this rock and it must skip, I don't know, 100 times on the water. Like I think I've probably only ever like gotten like a rock to skip like twice. And you're like, man, the absolute joy that these people seem to have for the dumbest activity I could possibly think of. Like that, it seems like if there is like a secret to the way to go throughout the world, that might be rooted in that, like to just go try to get really good at something.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, and I think there's even like, I think probably anyone is capable of getting really good at something, even if it's like completely valueless to society, you know?
Number 9.
No, number 9. Okay. This is me. This is funny because it kind of leads into your next one. There is so much consternation about sexy Halloween costumes, about how they are bad and should
is there?
Not. Yes. There's like a lot of people.
I might not be on that Twitter.
Well, you know, it's just a lot of people like the whole "my costume isn't your culture" for sure. Some
I don't know about that.
Yeah. I mean, are you sure? Are you sure that like, because for example, witches, right?
Yeah.
This shit was just made up in the 50s. You know what I mean? So what culture are we talking about here?
Right.
You know, but I feel like the success, you can really measure the success of a horror movie over the year by how many sexy Halloween costume versions of it there are around October or so.
And we had Megan.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. There was a little bit of drag Megan, but that was pretty much, I mean, I can't think of any other sexy Halloween costumes for 2020.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it, right?
Or was that 2023 or 2022?
That's a good question. I don't know when that stupid movie came out.
2022. So Megan was 2022. So what do we got from this year that people actually know about?
It seems like a lot of retro shit. Like there's like sexy Flintstones costumes and weird shit like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what's leading the pack this way. I've noticed that there's so much anime shit in younger people's culture that I feel like I've just completely lost track of about half of youth culture because I'm not paying attention to anime or whatever. Right. Like when I was looking at lists of cool horror stuff to think about and talk about, like there's so much Japanese anime horror that I was like, oh, I haven't watched any of this, or hardly any of it. And then when I do see it, it's usually really good, but they're all sexy costumes, like Chainsaw Man, like all the girls dressed in like sexy suits.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here for it is what I'm saying.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. What is your favorite sexy Halloween costume that you've ever seen?
I don't know. I guess as many as I've seen in my life, I don't know that any of them left a lasting impression on me.
Yeah, same. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, it just seems to be just a general... I guess I just like people getting dressed up. Like even like when
Completely.
People... like one thing I wish we had more of in society is... and this leads totally into your next one, is people dressing up to go to movies. Like
it's the best.
Thematically. I think it's so rad. I mean, having spent a long time with Rocky Horror Picture Show, obviously I have that as a reference, but I think the Barbenheimer, people dressing up in pink to go see Barbie is delightful.
It's great.
Same thing with all the Wakanda movies. I just love like this interpretive Afrofuturism that people just kind of put together as a thing, which I thought was really cool. And I really like... in particular, with like the Wakanda stuff and the Barbie stuff, although there are certainly like real world themes it references, like, you know, the cloth from different tribes in Wakanda, for example, or just Barbie is just a constant play on like waspy culture. You know, those things exist in the real world, but I like how people really tweaked and made it weird and made it like their own thing. You know?
Oh, for sure.
Like I saw one guy was like a Wakanda Wolverine. It was just like a cosplay mix up. I was like, this is rad. Like this dude had like kind of like his hair combed up and, you know.
Well, I think that the sexy Halloween costume, we're also viewing that in an era where furries are sort of, you know, we thought it would go away, but actually it's just kind of become more normative, and kids are more increasingly costuming to go to school, or not dressing like a normal kid, whatever that means. That's probably not the language I should use, but just let me say it, normal kid, you know, putting on jeans and a t-shirt and showing up for class. Yeah. Increasingly kids are showing up to class in costumes or kitty cat ears or whatever. And, you know, I think what's partly interesting about the whole furry movement is there is this insistence that it's not sexual. It's not sexual. First of all, it's for sure sexual. Yeah. But on the other hand, except when it's not, you know, dressing up in costumes and taking on some sort of visual identity, some sort of avatar to hide behind is amazing. And kids are doing it increasingly. Adults do it. You know, if you were a goth or a punk, you sort of had a toe dipped into that kind of thing. Like, I'm going to present this thing to the world that is very, very unlike what everybody else looks like, what the normies look like. People having Xena weddings. There are these opportunities to dress up like Halloween in costumes, but the everyday is Halloween thing, I think, is becoming increasingly true, not just for the goths who would take that song as an anthem, but anybody can sort of play along with that.
Yeah. It reminds me also of like all the advanced style people. You know, that blog, it's like an Instagram blog, Advanced Style. It's just basically this guy who went around photographing all the fabulous older women of Manhattan that wear like completely eccentric, like Hunger Games style outfits.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great. If you haven't, it's just advancedstyle.com.
Oh, it sounds great.
But there's like dudes versions of it too, and they all look like, you know, like sort of Mick Jagger meets Oscar Wilde meets Tiger King. Sort of like, it's just this wildness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like there's like definitely like a push more to like furry stuff and the wearing the ears and all that stuff feels very like a trend towards like maximalism. Whereas, I definitely still represent the tech worker minimalism drone life, where you're just wearing like gray, some plain shoes or whatever.
Yeah.
I was thinking about whether or not the furry thing is sexual or not sexual. It's like, it's kind of like saying that like about a bikini, right? Like, is it just a comfortable thing to wear that you like, or are you like on the cover of Maxim? It probably just depends on where.
Both, neither. Depends.
Yeah, the furry thing is, it's interesting how widespread it is, because I was talking to a coworker and they were giving me a story about their kid and something they were dealing with. And I was like, oh, it could be worse. They could be a furry. And of course, the kid's super into all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, what's wrong with that? I was like, nothing at all. Like, definitely don't go on the internet. Just let your kid be a wolfkin or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Number 10. I sort of have it framed. What I've written here is Barbie and the ideological object.
Man, you're in school right now.
I'm not in school for this shit. I love the Barbie movie. I haven't loved a movie that much in a really, really long time. What I've really seen a lot of when I look to cultural criticism is a lack of looking at this movie as anything other than an ideological object. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about the Barbie movie is that it plays with ideology. It names patriarchy and it does all this juggling around it. Wait, have you seen it yet?
No.
Okay. So no spoilers, but it plays with all of these ideas around feminism, femininity, masculinity, patriarchy, but it's all in play. It's all in flux. And it being the product of this time, it's in keeping with the time, but it's not making a concrete ideological statement.
Does it need to?
No, It fucking doesn't. And that's part of why I love it, is because as soon as you think it's lecturing at you, it says the exact opposite of that thing and takes that as its truth and runs with it for a while. Mm-hmm. And it does, in a sense, sort of, in the end, like, people are magic. Girls are great. That's about the most concrete ideological statement you can get out of it. But what's interesting is that we live in this era where, like, if Clueless came out today...
Oh, I was about to bring up Clueless.
Well, it's the best fucking movie. And it's very analogous. They're both movies that revel in the femme, right? Mm-hmm. But if Clueless came out today, people would be so quick. Everybody would have to have a hot take on white supremacy and privilege and all that. Mm. But the movie is about that. But it doesn't have to answer your questions about that. It is not a lecture. It's not a political lecture. It's a work of art that is saying a lot of complicated things simultaneously. And I think what is successful about the Barbie movie is that in an era where if you're watching a horror movie and there's a black character, they're not the killer. Mm-hmm. They can't be the killer. That's racist.
Unless it's Candyman.
Fair. But that's within world, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, I see what you're saying. But
no, I'm just fucking around.
Okay. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, we're now in this era where how plots are gonna run because that the writers would never make certain decisions that would be viewed as a political act.
Yeah.
So you can sort of do some predicting on how things are going to go. If a man is in a movie and says something really, really wickedly condescending to a woman, depending on who made that movie, you're pretty sure there's going to be a comeuppance.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not going to just hang. There has to be some sort of moral reckoning.
Yeah. This is melodrama.
It's melodrama, but it's politically motivated melodrama. It's melodrama in a way that is specifically politicized and predictable at this moment. And I feel like what Barbie doesn't do is play into that, is it plays with all those ideas, but gives no simple answers. And it's interesting how much criticism I've read about it that seems unable to reckon with that, unable to just take it as, this was a really fun movie that plays with ideology and gender.
Yeah.
And not have to, like, okay, how do I feel in relationship to this? Like, there's definitely, for example, been this reactivity from the far right that it's like anti-man or it's man-hating or something like that. It's like, no, it's actually not. You're just trying to place your ideological position between yourself and the movie and view the movie only through a very specific lens. And I'm finding the left cultural apparatus is often doing that too, is I can only view this movie in its ideological terms. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a failure. Pardon me, but I think that's a failure of imagination.
Man, you're so much more down on the left than I am.
I'm not down on the left. I'm down on this very specific elite cultural class that has decided...
The awfuls?
That has decided for all of us what's good and bad.
Do you know that term, awful?
No.
Adult, white, female, liberal? Awful.
Yeah, I don't like that very much.
I don't either. But what I'm
not into that one.
I don't like it as like a pejorative, but to me it is like that's what Greta Gerwig is, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
So you get one thing, it's like, is that her intent to have this? Or was this movie never, ever able to like get away from that? I mean, we're talking about like thinking about the politics of Clueless. Like Claire is a hardcore neoliberal. You know what I mean? She has literally an open borders policy. She spends her resources on the uplift of someone that she has decided is beneath her and should be lifted to her station.
Right.
It just keeps going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Her disdain for lifestyles other than her own, the stoners.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
But that's also, could be a consequence of it being literally framed on a Victorian era story, So,
yeah.
Like a post-Enlightenment Victorian era story, really. Or wait a minute. Is Jane Austen pre or post-Enlightenment?
Not a clue.
Man, you are clueless.
I think that part of how I'm viewing this as as a horror, it's not just about Barbie. It's that I think that podcasting is part of this problem. YouTube channels are part of this problem, that we sort of love people talking about stuff we like. And one of the main modes of people talking about stuff they like currently is very politicized. Mm-hmm. And it's filtered through an exaggerated lens. And the more extreme, the more clicks, like it's part of the social media economy.
Yeah.
And it's pretty joyless.
Yeah.
And I would never say, why can't people just like Barbie because it's fun? But what if these people with master's degrees from Ivy League colleges were talking about Barbie as just being fun? Is that possible without trying to prove something about how Barbie is successful or fails as a feminist project?
Yeah, well, I think part of the dourness of the academic is like that, like you can't use fun to crowbar power away from other people. It's sort of...
It's a failed project.
Yeah, it's a failed project. And then it's also that thing... again, Rick and Morty, which I keep thinking about because of the terribleness of the voice change this season.
I didn't even notice.
Really? I can't not hear it. It just bums me out. Huh. It's not because I think it's better or worse. It's just a change to a thing I watch to not think about. So like whenever there's like a change in a thing I just consume for comfort, it'd be like if your favorite taco place suddenly added a new spice you didn't like or something. It's like, I don't really have any, like, if Justin Roiland did all that shit, fuck that dude for sure. But it changes the thing I enjoy in a way I don't like. So whatever. But like, fascist Morty was like, I want to have just fun Rick and Morty adventures. Okay, that's cool. If we just take away the fact that you're a Nazi, like we just like at what, can we forget that? We can't forget that, and Rick Sanchez does not forget. And he uses a Meeseeks to end the situation. Anyway. Yeah. Dumb. It's interesting, like, think about, like, if academics looked to find positive, like, and this is almost sort of like steel manning. Like, what if you looked at something you should be against and found a thing to admire out of it? Would be interesting. Like, I imagine probably pretty much everybody I went to school with at Berkeley would not like the show Jack Ryan, which I just downloaded into my brain.
Yeah.
But there's a scene I was thinking about last night because I was thinking about how unspotlighted it was and how it's the sort of thing that you often hear people who are critical of Hollywood for race representation say there isn't any of this. So there's a scene where the new head of the CIA, who's a black woman, the villain of the story, who's a black dude from Nigeria, and the character James Greer, played by Wendell Pierce, are...
Love him.
Yeah, he's great. He's the whole reason to watch the show. He's like awesome in it. You know, it's basically like his character from The Wire, but super powered.
He is value added all the time.
All the time, yeah. And the guy that plays Mike November, Mike Kelly, I think is his name, the other dude with the shaved head, who just like comes in. He's like the Boba Fett of the whole thing. And like every single time they're like, "What are you going to do?" He's like, "Improv." But anyway, there's a scene where these three black characters are like, they are at the highest level of power in this scene. And it's interesting because like the female character, she acknowledges that she's trying to hold into this position and it's difficult for her because of expectations. So they have not ignored it at all, but they've also, without like spotlighting other than that, which is just a real thing in the show, it is a plot point that she is making this really powerful decision. Is she going to like not do the quote unquote right thing by the Jack Ryan model in order to like save her career, which means so much for these other things? And then eventually there's a way through it or whatever. But I was thinking that scene happened. That's a perfect example of the sort of thing that you would have never seen in the 60s, you know? Yeah. And it's like, it seems to me such a major step forward if your concern is like the politics of ideology in film and television, but just unheralded. And probably because people are just like super lefty academics, probably just aren't watching that show and letting it be good in certain ways. You know, I don't know. It'd be an interesting practice I mean, it's sort of the practice of the show, which is to look at something stupid seriously, but looking outside of your main stuff. I mean, I don't know. That could just be super obvious for people out there thinking about, they're like, yeah, you should look at things and be able to enjoy them. I guess.
Right. Right. But I mean, I also think it's worth, well, you know,
I just want to talk about Jack Ryan. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, part of what is hard about thinking about these things is that you only know what you know. And sometimes it feels like every day I wake up and I'm confronted with people wanting to deconstruct Barbie. Like, obviously I'm talking about myself.
It's so lazy and stupid, though. It's like, it's just made to be, it's basically a coloring book for ideological conversations.
Totally. But I guess, yes. But the thing I'm thinking of is that there are 8 billion people on planet Earth. Actually, Mark, how many of them are preoccupied with
almost
deconstructing
none.
Barbie?
Almost
none.
Yeah,
but to me, it feels like, oh, I have to deal with this again.
Well, it's like the thing, you know, like you live in the suburbs and somebody doesn't put their fucking recycling bin back. You know what I mean?
It's just all like, you think about for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's in your face, you know. It's interesting. I think like a lot of the problems of the world are like now are like problems of scale. Have you read that book or heard about that book, The Ancient City?
No.
So it kind of is popular because Mark Andreessen likes it, and he's like a big old venture capital dude. I heard him talk about it on a podcast. I was like, oh, that's actually interesting. And basically the theme of this book is, in the ancient times, every city or group was basically a super cult. Like they believed in their shit like so crazy. Like their little god statue was the real one. And history of that time was just super cults warring with each other, next to each other. And there wasn't really so much... power didn't like congeal together so much because the resources were so low, and it was hard for like one tribe to go rock another tribe. And so you get into like, you know, your Genghis Khans and your Alexander the Great. It's like it was hard until they had enough resources to go. And it seems like that people are just wired for that, like these little mini ideological battles. It seems to be like where people came from. And it's like once they start getting momentum, they start getting really dangerous.
Yeah. I find a really limited utility in viewing things through evolutionary biology or determinism or anything like that. But I mean, it's like aggression. We're not going to shame young men out of being aggressive. We're going to have to figure out a better way instead of just calling young men toxic and hoping that problem goes away.
Yeah.
We're going to have to figure out something else more interesting to do with young male aggression.
Yeah, it's one of the things I like. I think
it's fucking built in.
Oh, it's for sure built in,
and it fucks things up a lot.
And suppressing
especially
it,
if you don't you don't put it to good use.
Yeah, like suppressing it is terrible. I think it's pretty clear that it's sort of like it's simultaneously suppressed and the most toxic aspects are still celebrated. You know, so you kind of have like a worst case scenario right now, which is like shut up, the fuck up, and be an incel, or maybe be a, like what you always called the He-Man Woman Hater Club. You know, like those are like your options right now if you're a young man. And it kind of sucks. You know, like to me, like I feel like growing up, there were so many more examples of people to follow. And again, that's like the homogenization of everything seems so dangerous to me. Like, but the problem with scale, like, you know, 50 brown shirts in Germany, not that big of a deal. You let enough of them get together and you have a Nazi party, a fucking major problem.
Yeah.
Like it seems to be, what if there was almost like an anti-monopoly? Like we have these ideological monopolies in the world. Like it seems like if we had an anti-monopoly sort of stance on them, like, let's break this shit up. Let's break this shit up. I don't know how you would do that though. Now, I think it used to happen as a condition of like locale. You know, you would just live in the South and be like, I like South, fuck you, Yankee, or whatever. Now, like with these like global communities, like people are able to sort of sink into these like permanent ideologies a little bit from wherever they are.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'll be dead soon. So what?
Same.
Yeah.
High five.
No kids, aging out. Perfect place to be in this society.
Nothing but a fantastic podcast as your legacy.
Crystal and I, my wife, talked about like having a podcast. It was called Dink Quarterly, so double income, no kid quarterly, and we were just basically talk about like how fun it is to be a double income, no kid person.
So rude.
It's so rude. Because we've talked about,
look at my carefree lifestyle.
Yeah, it is carefree until you get old and then you die alone, and it's pretty fucked.
Yeah, you definitely need to save up more money than people who have kids that can look after them.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is like a lot of the no kid lifestyle. Like you have all this free time. And you should certainly put a lot of that free time into shoring up your finances.
Well, you save money by not having kids, but you actually need to still spend that money, invest that, instead of investing that money in a kid. Like, look, a kid is an end in itself, granted, but biologically, we're designed to, your kids take care of you. You get old and you get useless, and all you've got is wisdom, and they keep you from dying. They keep hunting and let your bad knees get elevated above your hips. And if you're not going to invest in that, you need to invest in something else that'll help keep bringing food to the table and take care of you in your older age. And nursing homes are pretty fucking alienating.
Yeah.
Like it's an interesting solution to the problem.
My goal is to like, my main meta goal is to not die in an old folks home.
Yeah.
Like that's like the main anxiety I have in life. It's like, I do not want any fucking part of that. I'd rather eat a bullet than do that, man.
I was kind of picturing you with like torn apart by a bear.
Well, I'd probably go out more like Gran Torino style, you know, like help a small family with its troubles against a neighboring gang. And,
so good.
Yeah. It's like,
I guess that was our top 10 list.
Yeah. Our top 10 of just random things that we decided to talk about because we haven't done the podcast in a long time.
The good and bad. Thanks for listening.
Man, I'm glad I don't have kids.